30 seconds. I'll tell you what, you can focus on that. I'll run into the screen, I'll run into the laptop thing. At 5, 4. I'm gonna go by this.
You thought it'd be an empty room.
What's that?
You thought it'd be an empty room.
Yeah, oh, good crowd. Oh my gosh. There it is. Am I on? Let's do it. Hello, Columbus! Lame. Hello, Columbus! Hey, I'm really excited to be here. My name is David. I work for Microsoft, and I used to come to, I went to like the first 5 or 6 Stir Trek conferences, but I haven't been back in 10 years. It's crazy. I'm so excited to be back here in Columbus, Ohio. What happened, here's my excuse. I lived in the Detroit area. I moved to Chicago. It turns out it's like twice as long a drive now than it was then. But I'm here. The story has a happy ending. I'm here to talk about Playwright. Playwright is a testing framework, a testing tool for doing user interface tests. It's really hard to see because of the lights in my eyes, so I'll cover them up. Tell me by a show of hands, who here is a software developer, first of all? The entire rooms went up. Who here is doing front-end development, user interface? About 3/4 of the room, hands went up. And then who's testing your front end? A little bit less than that. Who's got automated testing of their front end? Only a few hands went up that time. Okay, yeah, that's good. I'm saying this for the people we're recording this, and there's people in the theater next door and people at home in the future watching this. So, good. That's helpful to know. This is a tool for automating this. Who's using Playwright? All right, you guys will be bored. This is probably my superpower is telling you things that you already know, and that's probably mostly what I'll do today. Maybe you'll get one piece of information out of this. I think everybody knows this. There are reasons to do user interface tests, and I'm sure all of you know at least one of these things. You want to make sure it works. You want to make sure that even if it works properly, maybe you could make it work better just to improve the user experience. Maybe you want to just ensure the consistency, that it matches what your standards are and what other applications are using. There could be visual problems. Maybe everything works fine, but things are misspelled or in the wrong place. Maybe it works on Edge, but not in Chrome or not in Safari. That's a common thing a really common problem that people don't always test for. Maybe it works just fine for everybody that has full control of all of their senses, but if you're vision impaired, it's really difficult to work with. Or if you have trouble with your hands, it's really difficult to work with. Testing for that is important. Maybe there's something that happened that has nothing to do with the user interface, but it affects the user interface. So that kind of regression testing is important. And maybe it works just fine, but there's a security hole. So there's all sorts of reasons to test. And I think everybody knows at least most of these things because so many hands went up. We said we're doing some kind of testing, but not every hand went up for automated testing. Usually, this is historically how people have done user interface testing, is they will they'll write a script, a text document, something in Microsoft Word, for example, and say, here, they'll hand it to a human being, and the human being will look at it and say, okay, test 1. And usually they're structured in this way. Given that you've logged into the application, when you perform some action or some event occurs, when I click on this button, then I expect that this thing to happen. Some conditions ahead of time, and then I assert that some text will appear on the screen, or I'll navigate to this page, or whatever. That's the kind of test. But human beings typically would do that. That's in my career, in the many decades that I've been doing this, that's how testing goes. Question right here already? What?
I think someone up there had a question. There's a lot of
they're talking about the echo.
The echo.
Dale, is there anything that we can do about the echo?
I can fudge it a little bit, but we're going to have an echo.
It is what it is the answer. All right. And I'll just say this right now that I can't really see the audience very well. There are lights shining in my eyes. So I'll try to save some time for questions at the end. So raising your hand probably won't help. I won't see it. There is a Discord on the screen right there that you can use. All right. And all right, so there's problems with that approach. At first it's slow. Human beings, they have to read the document and type things in. It's human beings can make errors, of course. It's inconsistent. Sometimes the way you did it today might not be exactly the way you did it yesterday, and so there's some randomness inserted into that. And then also, I think a really key one is if you have a CI/CD, a continuous integration, continuous deployment, you can't really. I shouldn't say you can't. You can stick a human being into that process, but that's a bottleneck. That's a really slow part. You could have a part of your CI/CD that says, okay, now wait for David to show up and run these manual tests and then go on to step number 7. That's a huge bottleneck right here. It'd be nice if we could automate that. That's what we're going to talk about today. How do we automate it? That makes it faster. Because we can write it faster, we can test more, so increase our test coverage. And I think most importantly, it's consistent. So computers are great at consistency. That most of the traditional software development we do it every single time. We get the same output. AI is a little bit different, but that's another story for another day. So we can do that faster. It means cheaper. Whoops, sorry about that. And we can integrate it. We can plug in these automated tests into our CI/CD pipeline. We can also log. If we're relying on a human being to run the test, then generally they'll say, okay, it failed and here's why it failed, but we don't really get the details we can get with a tool like Playwright. So here's Playwright here. You can do it. We don't have internet access in this theater, but if you go home and go to playwright.dev, then I took a screenshot of the top half of the screen, and it is a tool that allows you to generate and run automated user interface tests, which is cool. I mean, it's been at least 15 years that I've been generating unit tests, and those work really well. There's tools like NUnit and XUnit and things like that, but they don't have any user interface to them. This extends it to the user interface. This is a node.js library. I don't think it's really that important to know it, except for that when you install it, there are some tools that you'll use to install it. And what does it do? Here's, for one, it's cross-browser, which is nice, because as I said before, that's a common issue, is the idea that, okay, I tested it on my machine, and I run Chrome all the time. I didn't test it on Safari, and now my Safari users, there's that one page that doesn't work because for some reason, Safari just works a little bit differently. So it is cross-browser. Even if I don't have a Safari installed, it'll automatically test for that if I tell it to. It's cross-platform, so it'll test for Linux, Mac, Windows. It's cross-language because this is really a tool for testing browser applications. So all I really care about is what's inside the browser. We don't really care whether it was written in C# or Java or JavaScript or Node or Angular, whatever. So the language that your application is written in is irrelevant. It's just testing what's on the screen. And it has support for not only Chrome, Safari, Edge, desktop browsers, but also for mobile browsers as well. So you can turn that on also if it's important for you to create an application that runs on a mobile application or on a mobile device. There are some advantages of the Playwright framework itself. It has this idea of auto wait, and auto wait, what I mean by that is that sometimes if I say, when I click this button, then I expect to see the text on screen. Well, it'll wait long enough for the entire event to occur so it has time for that button to appear, because not everything happens simultaneously in a web application. It does automatic retries. So if it fails the first time, it can check again, but it won't check forever. There's a timeout period, so if it doesn't happen within X number of seconds, it'll automatically fail the test. Which is probably a good idea. It provides a bunch of logging information, some trace. It'll even capture screenshots and videos that you can look at later. It does, if you have multiple threads running at the same time, multiple tests running at the same time, it isolates each browser so they're not interfering with one another. And if you have a login application, you can log into it one time. You don't have to every single time you run a new test log in. It remembers the security context in which it's running. So these are all things that are just built into the framework that you don't have to worry about. The tooling itself, of course, you can write tests and you can run those tests, but there's some really cool stuff inside of here. The one thing that I really like is the ability to generate tests from your actions. So there's a code gen tool where I can fire up a browser, bring up my page, and start navigating it. Go to a URL, click on a button, type some text into a text box, and every time I do something, it records a line of code that reflects that. And that's a really good starting point for your test. You could write all of them from scratch if you want to, but generally what I'll do is I'll start with that, and then I'll start refining it. Say, you know what, I need to do a little bit more besides that in here. And then once the tests have run, there's a trace viewer that gives you details about what is being run, and there are reports that you can display. All right, that's the advantage of Playwright right there. Let's talk about how do we get it to work. It's an open source tool. It's a node tool, so you just go to a command line and type npm init. You have to have node installed. I should probably point that out. npm init Playwright, and then the version number. I just always say at latest. That just gives me whatever the latest version is. And then when I run this command, it actually walks me through a wizard, asking me a series of questions that I can answer. It says, do I want the tests to be run in TypeScript or JavaScript? Do I want, it'll generate a folder to hold those tests. It'll ask me what's the name of that folder. By default, it's just called tests. It will generate a GitHub action, basically an empty GitHub action, and it'll ask me which browsers do I care about. And once I've done that, then it creates a file with all that configuration information in it that looks something like this. It tells you, the test configuration file, the GitHub Actions information. It even generates a couple of sample tests that you can use. Here's an example. This is the auto-generated sample test. Here, there are two of them. Oh, can't see up there. I got to look over here. One of them, I'll just walk through this here because I don't have internet access. It's going to be tough to actually demo this live. But I do have some demos that I've recorded, some videos that I'll show you given time. So this one, let's look at this test right here. Await page.goto. And this is the playwright.dev page. So this just says navigate to, the name of the test is has title, and I'm going to navigate, it's just like I open up a browser and navigate to that page, and then expect the page to have a title called Playwright. It's a really simple test. Navigate to that page, just if it passes, if the title of the page is Playwright. Here's another one, pretty simple as well. Go to the same page, playwright.dev, await page.goto, and you can see the object model in the SDK here. There's a page object with a goto method. You could write that yourself. IntelliSense works in here in most IDEs. Navigate to that page, and then await. This says find page.getByRole link name get started .click. This says find a link with the text get started and click that link. So if you didn't know the syntax of that, this gives you an idea of a common thing that you would want to do here. And then here's my assertion here. Expect page.getByRole heading installation to be visible. So there should be a link on there called installation, and it should be visible. So really simple test. You can see that might be a common thing that you'd want to do for yours. My IDE of choice is Visual Studio Code. This is supported, and there are plugins for the JetBrains tools and for Visual Studio as well. But this is, if you work in Visual Studio Code, you probably want to install this extension right here, Playwright Test for VS Code. It's right on here, and that gives you things like the ability to record and run tests right within the IDE, the ability to run the tests and step through them one line at a time, and it even has some AI tools that lets you fix your tests as well inside of here. All right, how do we create tests? Well, I showed you a test. You could just go into your text editor and start writing them using the object model. IntelliSense helps, but a better way to do it is, or at least to get started with it, is with this CodeGen tool. And this command here, just go into the terminal window, type npx playwright CodeGen, and it'll launch a browser, and it'll launch an editor, and every time you do something in the browser, a line of code will appear in that editor. So when you're done, you can just copy that code in the editor and copy it into your test file, wherever you want. If you want to start at a specific URL, npx playwright CodeGen URL, and that just does the same thing, but it starts at a given URL. So I can take that, and to run the test, npx playwright test. That's all you need to do. That one line of code, you see a pattern here. It's always npx playwright something. npx playwright test will find all the tests in your project and run them all. If you want to be more specific, you can run just a single test file in here. If you want to run a particular configuration, like only certain browsers should run, then you can add a config argument to the npx test here. And there's this workers argument as well. If you have a lot of tests to run and you want them to run in parallel, you can specify how many workers to fire up to do that. If you omit that, it'll just guess, it'll figure out what's the optimal number of workers. So as I was playing around with this last night, it always just launched one worker because it was such a small set of tests. But if you have lots of them, maybe you want them to run across like 20 different worker threads. And then when the results, this command right here, npx playwright show report, will generate, and well, the report is generated when the tests run, but it'll just open up a report in your browser. It'll run a small web server locally, and you can see whether or not each test passed. And you see in this example here, one of the tests did not pass. Click on that and drill down. It'll tell you why it didn't pass, what line of test it failed on, what was the error that occurred at that time, and give you some information about that. All right, so that's all. Everything I talked about just runs locally on your computer. It's really cool. The only thing that doesn't run locally is I happen to have a URL that was out on the web, but all the Playwright stuff was running locally. If I want to run in the cloud, Azure provides a workspace for running Playwright tests, specifically designed for running Playwright tests. And this will come into play when we start doing CI/CD, because your CI/CD pipeline doesn't have access to your local computer. It has access to whatever it has access to. So you want to run those things in the cloud. And the way you do that is by creating what's called a Playwright workspace. And this also allows the whole scalability and reliability that Azure just brings to the table right here. So if you've worked, who here has worked with Azure before? Most of the hands went up. All right, so you know in Azure, there's this big plus create a resource button on here. That's how you create most things. You can do this through infrastructure as code as well. But just to get started, create a resource, search for Playwright Workspace and click on Create. And then this blade, this is pretty common for just about any Azure service. You fill it in, you say, okay, what's the name of my service? What resources does it belong to? If I have multiple subscriptions, I'll select that. What region should I run it in? Things like that. Should I support reporting? And if I'm reporting it, it's going to put logs into a storage account. So just a few simple questions. And then it generates something that looks like this. And there's all sorts of information along here. You can see along the left, you can configure things like the scalability and the security of it and so on. The important thing is just on the front page here is this is the endpoint that when you tell Playwright to run, we want it to run at that URL right here. So what we'll do is if we want to run locally, we'll sit at our local command and just run a command line to say, run these same tests, but don't run them on my machine, run them in Azure, then we'll initialize it a little bit differently. Before we saw npm init Playwright at latest, we just say at Azure Playwright at latest. And that'll add a few extra files to it to configure it to say how do I want it to run? Where is the server? What are the credentials? Things like that. And when we do that, we probably don't want to be passing in, we want to have somewhere to store that endpoint right there. And there's a couple ways to do that. If you're doing it at scale, you probably want to put it in something like Azure Key Vault, but you can also put it in an environment variable. These other steps here are just how to save an environment variable. An environment variable called Playwright service URL, and I set that equal to that value that I find in the portal. And then I can log into Azure and just run with this command right here, npx playwright test, optionally the name of the test file, and then the configuration. This configuration file will have information that includes the endpoint of the Azure Playwright service, or Playwright Workspace it's called. Now, I'll give you these slides at the end. At the very last slide is a link to the slide, so you can have these steps, but you don't really even need that because when you create a Playwright Workspace, you can go on the Get Started tab and it actually lists the steps. And not only the steps, but actually it'll have the URL of the endpoint and so on here. So you can just follow those steps right there. But then the last one here is just to run them. And these are the same things, npx playwright test, you can do a name of the file. The only thing is you want to make sure you have this config file. So if your URL, your endpoint is in that config file, you want to make sure you set that config argument in here. But that's all described right in here. You can copy and paste that one step at a time into your IDE. And that works really, really well because it's easy to forget what all those steps are. There's only 4 or 5 of them, but still, it's still easy to forget. The only thing about this, I'll give you one warning, is that you can't, it's probably hard to see from here. Well, maybe not, because these slides are 100 feet tall, but there's one of them that mentions the config file ends in .js, and if you answered the question that I want them to run is text TypeScript files, then it'll be end in .ts. So if you get a file not found error, you may want to change one of these commands here to say, my config file ends in .ts.js. So I'll just point that out to you, just in case we get that. All right, and the last thing I want to talk about is integration with CI/CD. I'm talking really fast because this is only a 45-minute talk. CI/CD, of course, is continuous integration, continuous deployment. These are automated deployments. If you're doing anything beyond like a simple one-off playing around thing, if something that's going to go into production, anything that has more than one developer, anything that you're going to update in the future with any degree of regularity, you probably want an automated process for deploying that. And a CI/CD pipeline will do things like get all the code out of source control, compile it, make sure it compiles, run any linters that are appropriate for it, run the automated tests, unit tests, integration tests, user interface tests, and then deploy it out to wherever it has to go. And this is really nice. It saves a lot of time, but more importantly, it makes things a lot more consistent. And running these tests is key, because even if you're a perfect coder, things can still break when you check things in, because you don't know that other people on your team might have done something that's inconsistent with what you're doing. So having a repeatable process that says, every time I push code into source control, run through the CI/CD pipeline and just make sure that it compiles, make sure that all these tests pass before I decided to deploy it, because somebody may have changed the name of a field on the back end that's inconsistent with what I'm doing on the front end. Maybe everything worked fine by ourselves, but when we brought our code together, it didn't work. All right, I'm probably preaching to the choir. You probably knew that part already, but CI/CD, if you wanted to integrate these Playwright tests into CI/CD, there's a few things you want to do. I'm going to show, there's a couple different tools for doing CI/CD. I'm going to focus on GitHub, very popular very popular tool. And GitHub has a thing called Actions. GitHub Actions, the way you create a GitHub Actions is with a YAML file. A YAML is just a format of, it's called yet another markup language. And in there are the steps. Here's where the code is located in this GitHub repository. First step, pull the code down. Second step, compile the code. Third step, run these tests, etc. And one of those steps will be run these Playwright tests. So you need a GitHub repository. You'll want to create the YAML file to do this GitHub action. And in that YAML file, there will be a place that says run the Playwright test. And the Playwright test will have to know, if they're going to run on Azure, they'll have to know the endpoint of that Azure workspace. You probably don't want to hard code that in there. You want to put that someplace safe so it's not checked into source control. So GitHub has this concept of secrets. And in there, you could put secrets like the endpoint, like the accounts under which you're going to run, or some of the security information that's going to run, which not only keeps them safe so that people on the internet can't see them, but also gives you a little flexibility. So if you wanted to run this in a different environment, maybe you've got one Azure account or Azure subscription just for developers and another one for user acceptance test and another one still for production, you can change those secrets to accommodate that. All right, so and then you have to, because this is running on Azure, we want to have some security around it, and the way that security is built into Azure is with Intra ID. Intra ID, you may know it as Azure Active Directory. A couple of years ago, it got rebranded. Microsoft, we're always rebranding things because we want to sell more t-shirts. And so Azure Active Directory is now Intra, and on there you need to there'll be an account under which this runs. You want to make sure it has the right permissions. The way we do that is there's a contributor role, and then we also have to give it permission to deploy to GitHub. So that's important here. And there's a bunch of steps in here for doing that. I documented them in here. I don't think I'll have time for the video for this, but I have a link to it online. I'll show you. But essentially, create your GitHub repository, register an application, enter application inside of Microsoft Azure, assign, when you register that application, it creates a user principal. That's the principal under which that application runs. Give that principal account the contributor role, add it to the contributor role, and add the GitHub credential to the application, which gives it permission to deploy to GitHub, and then add these secrets in here. These 4 secrets are important. Put those into the GitHub portal. And that's a little bit complicated, a little bit, I found it non-intuitive. That's why I created a video, which I'll share with you. And then you create the YAML workflow, which references all this stuff right here. All right, these are my slides except for this last one, which is the caution, which just be aware, user interface tests, they tend to be a lot slower than other types of automated tests. You know, if I'm used to doing unit tests that just test a small bit of code, which runs in a fraction of a second, user interface tests, they might take a few seconds to run each one. They just are. They're just complicated. They're slow. They involve clicking around and looking at things and typing things in. So be cognizant of that. Maybe think about how often do you want those tests to run. It'd be nice if they ran every single time you did a pull request, but maybe if they take for 30 minutes to run, that's not a good idea. Maybe you want them to run once a day, something like that. Just there's no right answer to that, but consider that. The other one is that user interface tests, they tend to be more fragile than other tests because user interfaces, they tend to change more than just about any other part of the application. And sometimes what seems like a trivial change, you know, this confirmation message, I've decided it's not concise enough, or it's not clear enough, or it should be longer or shorter or a different color. That can break a test. And those are things that people change all the time. You know, just some manager comes by and says, you know, that should be green. By golly, let's change it. That might break your test. So they tend to be a lot more fragile than other tests, and which is a good argument for running them more frequently. If something like that changes, you could fix it right away because you know what changed. All right, we are at 2:25 after the hour, and I have 20 more minutes for demos. All right, I will pause for questions right now, but I see a hand, this guy's hand right here, the second row of the balcony.
Very serious on sites that use CAPTCHA.
Does it use CAPTCHA? It would if it's part of the user interface, then it will capture the CAPTCHA. So if you wanted to see if well, there's some random. The problem with CAPTCHA is the randomness to CAPTCHA. So I don't know that you could test for that. So you have your given that you have a CAPTCHA screen, when the user types in the CAPTCHA password or the CAPTCHA thing that they'll click that does a message appear. It's hard to predict what's going to be a successful CAPTCHA. You can certainly catch a failing test. You could just do something that's going to fail and say, does it? If I randomly select something where I click the wrong outside of the bicycle or traffic light section, I expect to see this message, something like that. But I don't know how you could consistently do that. I should have repeated the question. The question was, does it work with CAPTCHA? Sort of, kind of. It works best with predictable things. Right here in the second row.
How do you manage the fragility of the tests with, you know, making sure certain parts of your tests are reusable? Like
the question was, how do you manage the fragility of your tests? And I think the best way to do it is to have small tests and to run them as frequently as possible, because that's just a given. People change UIs a lot, and you don't even non-technical people just come by and say, this should be moved over to page 2 and not on page 1. Just catch that as soon as possible, and that's just a much more agile methodology. You can absolutely, the question was, can I reuse sections? It is just code. That's all it is. So yeah, in your code, you could call a reusable method. Absolutely. Great question. Right over here.
Questions via Discord.
Oh, already been Discord. All right, let's try it.
Do you have any examples or references for using Playwright in pods at scales, like with Kubernetes?
Playwright doesn't really care if it's running in pods or in so the question was, do you have examples of using Playwright with pods or Kubernetes? And my response is, it is just dealing with the results of that. The results are in a browser. It's going to run the stuff, whatever's in the browser. So it doesn't care. It is running at scale because of the workers. If it's running at Azure, then not only you can specify the number of workers, but you can also, there is configuration in there to say how much do you want to scale out. And you can put bigger machines on there. You can throw more resources at it, multiple machines to scale out, bigger machines to scale up. So yes, I don't think the Kubernetes pods part is relevant to that question, but it definitely does scale. All right, you guys want to see some demos? They're not totally live, but I recorded them live. Let me see. It's not here. Hang on. C /videos, final output, and where's my Playwright stuff? Come on. In fact, I know I wrote in here, Am I displaying this? Oh, I'm not displaying. Hang on 1 second. I need to switch this over to duplicate. That's good. And this says I should start it at the 112 mark of this demo right here. I'll share with you. Oh, here, before I do this, I will say that, first of all, in this slide deck, these links here, they won't totally help you because I don't show the URL, but if you click on them, they'll take you to the documentation for Playwright, the documentation for Playwright workspaces. These are the videos that I created. I'm not online, there's no internet in this movie theater, but if you go to my YouTube channel, then you'll see a bunch of videos on, there's about 45 minutes worth of videos on here. And even though you can't use that, you can, I'll leave this up for a second, that URL will take you to this slide deck right here. So I saw a few people were taking pictures of slides earlier. That really wasn't necessary. This is the only thing you need to take a picture of, either that tiny URL or the QR code. Then you'll have the slide deck, then you'll have everything in that slide deck, including my TV shows right here. All right, are we good? I want to give everybody a chance to get that. Okay, all right, so I wanted to go back to just the basics of, in the next 15 minutes, I've got the basics of Playwright. I've got 3 videos. One shows the basics of Playwright. One shows how to use it within an Azure Playwright workspace, and one shows the CI/CD. It's about 45 minutes worth of video. I won't have time for all of that. This is playwright.dev. That's the browser right here. Let me go up a little further here, and you can see now I'm in Visual Studio Code. I've installed the extension for Playwright, and in here I am going to type npm init playwright at latest to install the latest version. And you can see right here it's asking me, do you want to use TypeScript or JavaScript? Default is TypeScript. I think I just said enter JavaScript. What am I doing? You can select it. I selected JavaScript. Where do you want to put your end-to-end tests? You can see there's a default in there. Tests is the default. I can just press enter and select that, but I can change it if I want. Do I want to add a GitHub Actions workflow? I said yes, I do. That was the default. I'm just taking the defaults here. Install Playwright browsers, and I'll just say yes, install them all. And it created this. And what you can see is a lot of these things over on the top left, you can see way over here, it just created some scaffolding for a new test project in here. And I'm going to open up this config file. No, I'm going to open up the tests. There's the tests. I already showed this on the screen. You can walk through those 2 tests I showed on the screen. There's some information about just configuration on here. This is an interesting one, playwright.config.js. And in here, there are the 3 browsers, Chromium, Firefox, and WebKit. Edge and Chrome use Chromium. Firefox, of course, uses Firefox, and Safari uses WebKit. I'm almost positive that's right. If I'm wrong, shout out to me. But maybe you don't care about Safari or whatever. You could comment that out. And even down below, there's some commented out code for the mobile browsers that you can uncomment if you want to. Let's go ahead and move forward here. Come on, faster, faster. There's the tests. I already walked through those tests and showed you, so why don't I speed this up? How do I speed it up? Edit, clip, oh, there was speed. So let's do double speed so we can get to the good stuff faster. And here, you can see that there's some code in here. Skip ahead. You can see there's IntelliSense going on. Let me just skip to when I actually run the test. Come on, come on, come on. Here we go. So now, down at the bottom here. Come on. You can't see it anymore. It's back, back. It's below the orange line. There we go. All right, so I can edit these tests if I want to. And now I say npm playwright test, and that'll just run all the tests that it finds in here in my file. And even though I only have 2 tests, you notice it ran 6 tests. And the reason it ran 6 is because I told it 3 different browsers. So it ran each test 3 times. And then I type in npx playwright show-report, and it brings up this report. And all these 6 tests passed. I already knew that already. If I want to drill down into them, you can see the details of this. This is more useful on a failing test. You want to see why it failed, but you can see that there's information in here about how to do that. And then I can add this here. So here I'm adding a get a link. Let's see. Give it a second here. Oh, here we go. I'm gonna generate a report here. So npx playwright code gen. Let me slow that down a little bit here. Pause the video. And now I want to go back to speed. 1x, and I'll go back a little bit here. So what I've done here is I typed npx playwright code gen, and this is the tool that I talked about that will generate code for you based on my actions. What this will do is it'll launch 2 windows. One is a browser, and you can see that this is asking some important questions like what is your name? The second question, what is your quest? And some of you will have already guessed the third question, what is your favorite color? So these are important life questions here, and I want to test this page out. So I've got this thing running in a browser. There's a submit button down at the bottom, and there's also another window that pops up, which is going to be where the code is going to be generated. Come on. I can also do, if I want to go directly to that page, just specify the name of the page, or the URL of the page rather. It'll start generating tests and start on that page. If not, I have to navigate to it. Okay, here we go. This is the answer ye these questions 3. That's one window. The other window that's created is this one right here. And this is the code. You can see the first line is go to that page right here. Await page.goto and the full URL of my page. That works here. And then when I click on this text box, you see another line of code appeared here. Await page.getByRole. And then when I start typing in that role, what is your name? I am Arthur, King of the Britons. Another line of code will appear with the typing in. There it is, await.page by getByRole dot press tab, or I'm sorry, dot fill Arthur King of the Britons dot press tab, because I pressed the tab key, and then it's selected what is your quest? I seek the Grail, and then what is your favorite color? I'm going to click blue, no green. Yeah, so this is and it did both of those. It did the check blue, check green, and then I just say done. Or actually I didn't say done, because there's other things you can do in here as well. If the buttons at the top, this toolbar at the top allows you to do things like add assertions, to say I expect this thing to happen. And so when I click on, it's still running here, the assertion button right here, come on. Maybe I better speed it up. Here it comes. Here we go. So assert visibility, that little eyeball here. I hovered over it and it told me that, and I want to make sure that, click on that. I want to verify that the Save My Response button is visible. That's all I care about. I don't care what it says. I just want to make sure that it actually is displayed. And I can also do assert that certain text is appearing on here. That's a different button in here. Right there, this button, assert text. Click on that, and then I'll select this, and I want to make sure, and I can change this if I want to, but I want to assert that the text there says your response was submitted. And you can see this line of code right here. Await expect page.getByRole.toContext text. The IntelliSense would help you write that, but this is a really good starting point. So I would always start with code generation here. And then I'll move ahead a little bit here to show running the test. Do it by speeding up to 2x. Here we go. Oh, I also point out that I can change this. So by default, it did everything in JavaScript, but you can switch to C# using MS Test. You can use switch to Java. You can switch to Python. You've got some options on here. Even you can options upon what kind of texting framework you have underneath the hood. So you've got all sorts of options that you can do here. When you've got it exactly the way you want it, just copy this, paste it into your code, and now here I've got another test. So now when I run my tests, It had an import statement, which I didn't need because that's the top. And now I can run, now I've got 3 tests running on 3 browsers, so it should run 3 of them. So now when I do npx playwright test, it'll run all 3. It ran 9 of 9. They all passed, except for one of them. The new test I wrote, for some reason, it did not succeed in Safari. And maybe it's because I don't really use this as a Windows machine. I'm not using it for Safari. I have an issue in that form with Safari. I probably want to dig into that a little bit further and find out why that is. In fact, there's that checkbox, checking that, the blue checkbox. It worked in the text box when typing in, but checking the checkbox caused a problem of some kind. I want to dive into that and correct that before I release it, because some of my users are in fact using Safari. All right, I got about 6 minutes left. I'll show you a little bit of the next one here, the next video here, which I want to start at, I know, at 42 seconds. Let's go ahead and do that. Got pictures of me in here. We're 42 seconds right here. And this is how you create a, am I going at 2 speed? Because we're pressed for time, I'll make sure I'm going at double speed here. Just go in here, this is how you do everything in the user interface. Select a resource group, select a subscription, select a users group, give it a name. I want it to, what region it'll be in. Not every region supports Playwright workspaces. I can give it tags if I want to. That's just for reporting if I want to sort or filter it, you know, I could do that. And if I've done everything right, then I can click create. When I did this, I had already created one. You see it's right here. Right here, this is the endpoint, right up here. That's the important thing. I want to know these are the steps. And I can just copy these into a terminal window to get started with this, and that's what I'm doing here. Here's the sample test right here. Oh, I'm showing the way that I did it locally. What I really want to do is run this in the browser. I've already installed the Playwright service package. Let's do that, npm init at Azure Playwright latest. And that'll install it here. I already answered the questions one time for the same project. So it knows that I want to use JavaScript. It knows that I want to use that thing. And you can see the changes here that it made. Things that are appropriate to Azure, like that endpoint in the configuration file. And then I have to log into Azure because I'm going to run this locally from my local machine, but I'm going to type commands locally, but I want them to run into Azure, so I need to log into Azure. I happen to have lots and lots of Azure accounts because of all the customers I've worked with over the last 12 years. I picked the subscription that is really appropriate for this, which is my subscription, and then I want to create an environment variable here that points to the endpoint. It even has the code for doing it in Bash versus in PowerShell, and then I'll run the test, Playwright test. And here's the warning I was telling you about, is the config. It says .ts, but I had to change that to .js. It wasn't smart enough to know that my files were actually JavaScript, not TypeScript, because I answered that question when I created this. I set workers equals 20. It probably won't spin up 20 workers. There's only 9 tests to run. It'll probably only spin up 1 or 2 workers on here, but I set a maximum of 20 workers, and it ran them and with 1 worker, and all 9 of them passed in Azure. So they actually, it's interesting, they passed in Azure, they didn't pass on my local machine. There's probably something about my local machine which caused an issue, and here's the tests right here. Here's the results in a report. And this one part here, I'm just showing how if you don't want to save that environment variable in memory, here's one way to save it inside of a config file. You can put things in a .env file, put that same environment variable in a .env file, and in your config file, point to that .env file and say, that's where my environment variables are. Copy this into here. So all this video is available to one of the links in my slide deck shows it to you. So I only have about 2 minutes left before they're going to kick me out of here, and I will take that 2 minutes for, if we don't have questions that aren't answered, go to that Discord link at the bottom of this big screen out here. I think the folks at home will get that as well. Raise your hand if you have a question right now that we can answer in a minute and a half. I see one in the front row right here.
Can you control like the sensitivity to the code gen tool? Like I noticed like it didn't write a line for like focus.
Question was, can I change the sensitivity of the CodeGen tool? I do not know the answer to that question. I suspect no. The CodeGen tool is really designed just to get you started, and so you can understand the syntax. It's just a starter thing. Save a lot of typing, and there may be things that maybe I accidentally clicked on this, and I don't want a line for that. Just delete that line. Good question. All right.